the IATF 16949 podcast, where we talk about all things automotive. Find us on our channel at youtube.com/IATF 16949 auditing, or visit our website at www.iatfglobaloversight.org. This is the IATF 16949 podcast.
So hello again, Niall and Devon. Pleased to be here for this next podcast. And I think from the feedback that we've had from the listeners, people enjoyed the first two that we produced. So I have some questions that have been posted on the YouTube channel. Are you okay, Devon and Niall, if I ask you some of those questions?
Absolutely. Yeah, fire away. We'll do our best, as always, to answer them. Can't guarantee it, but we'll try.
Yeah, good. Okay, Niall, maybe you can have a go at answering this one first then. So obviously we're seeing a lot of changes within the automotive industry and increasing use of embedded software in products that end up in automotive applications. So if an organization only develops software or does programming, if that's all that organization does, under the rules fifth, would they be eligible for IATF certification?
In a word, no. So if all they did was to design, say all as if it's really straightforward, but if they just design, develop software, then they're not eligible in their own right for certification. It all still hangs around a manufactured product. Now, there were some changes in the IATF standard that brought in products with embedded software. But if the software development organization themselves, if all they did was develop software under Rules 5th, they would not be eligible for certification.
Right, interesting. And Devon, from your experience then, is there any discussions in IATF to maybe broaden the eligibility driven by Rule 6?
Yeah, that's a good question, Paul. So obviously within Rule 6, the IATF is concentrating heavily on what can and cannot be eligible for certification. I mean, we know electrification of vehicles is really ramping up all around the globe currently. So we have to look at software. We have to look, are the charging cables going to be eligible? Are the actual charging ports themselves eligible? So these are all things that the IATF is looking at.
Yeah. And now it sort of opens up the question then. I think most listeners will know that there is the work going on to produce a 6th version of the rules. Is there going to be any opportunity for supplier input into those developments?
Yeah, I'm adamant there will be, Paul. And the first thing I would say, and we will have said it before at some point on a video or a podcast, is please ensure you subscribe to the IATF Global Oversight website. That way you will get updated with any, you'll receive updates about opportunities to contribute to any stakeholder feedback. I think it probably will be limited to certified organisations. So the opportunity to provide feedback, I think, will be through certified organisations. Of course, within the sort of IATF world, there is regular feedback with our own colleagues and people that we work closely with, and also certification bodies obviously are given an opportunity to provide their feedback. But I think, to answer your question, it is highly likely that certified organisations will also have the opportunity to provide their feedback. And the best way for them to understand how to do that is to make sure they're subscribed to the Global Oversight website at www.iatfglobaloversight.org.
Okay, so I guess the message that I'm getting there then is watch this space. because there could be developments in the eligibility. But as of now, if an organization only design and develop software, they are not eligible for IATF certification.
Exactly, and Paul, just to kind of expand, we all regularly receive questions about whether something is eligible or not eligible. So I think I can confidently say, as a minimum, there will be a clearer definition of eligibility in Rule 6. I think the slightly more complicated question is how non-manufacturing organisations could become eligible. But to be honest, it's very unlikely that that will be within Rule 6th edition. I think Rule 6 will attempt to make it clear as to what organisations are eligible, but it will orientate around, I guess, what we think of as tangible automotive products, so things that you can touch and feel.
Yeah. Good. Okay. Now, a lot of the other questions that we've had posted are around the standard IATF 16949 and some of the requirements in the standard. So, Devon, the first question I've got here then is, I think we know that in some manufacturing processes, there's a lot of code scanners and sensors that are built into the process that really build an error proofing or mistake proofing system. And the question is about the validation that these are working and what frequency the validation should be done. Have you any comments on that?
Yeah, Paul, that's an interesting question, right? So obviously, if sensors are called out as a part of error proofing, they need to be verified that they are working effectively. If not, then that would be an issue.
Yeah.
As far as the frequency of verification, it needs to be risk-based and take account historic information, but there's no set term by the IATF. However, there could be set in your customer specific requirements, so you want to check those and make sure that you are following what is stated within the company's internal QMS.
Right. Okay. No, I think that that's clear. And I agree with you that there isn't that frequency specified in IATF, but it should be a risk-based decision, based upon the organization's analysis. Niall, the next question then, and this is probably a more general question about auditing and auditor competency. The person that fed in this comment was about sometimes auditors use the terminology that is within the standards. So, for example, an auditor may say to an auditee, "Can you show me your quality objectives?" And sometimes I think the auditees don't understand the terminology. So I guess the question is really, what advice can you give to auditors about the way they go about formatting their questions to ensure that they're understood by the auditees?
Yeah, that's it's a great question almost. And the standard and some of the terms that we see in the standard, it's almost we have to understand what that means. And Paul, you'll know we've seen many examples in the past where words almost take on a whole new meaning, and auditors are maybe focusing too much on individual words, and maybe losing sight of the sort of expectations. I think, to answer your question, it's important that auditors use terminology that the clients understand. So whilst the standard might use a particular word, the job of the auditor is to confirm effective implementation of requirements. The job, and I would say the skill of the auditor, is to be able to do that in a way that they're not too bogged down in the words in the standard, but much more about the meaning and how a particular organisation has implemented and those requirements in their system processes, their management system processes. So it's very important that auditors use terminology that the people they're talking to understand, rather than just using kind of, let's say, quality management system definite terms and definitions, which might be familiar to those people working in quality management system work, but maybe need some translation into the day-to-day work of someone in a manufacturing organization.
Yeah, so I guess, if we take the word quality objectives, many people would actually probably better recognize the term key performance indicators.
Yeah.
And again, I think auditors use terms like the quality policy. They use terms like interested parties. And maybe organizations struggle to understand that terminology. So I guess an auditor has to have the competency that they can adapt their terminology that can be understood by the auditees. I think, as you say now, that's probably the general point of this question, this comment, I think.
Yeah.
Devon, the next question then is about now IATF produce the NC analysis showing the top 10 major nonconformities and the top 10 minor nonconformities. And my understanding is that they are updated monthly and published on the IATF Global Oversight website. The question is it possible to break down that NC data by region or by country? China and North America was mentioned in the question. What's your views on that?
Right. So that's a good question. Obviously, we worked hard on getting the top major minors published on the IATF Global Oversight website. As far as taking it more in depth, at this time, the IATF is not looking into that due to a lot of various reasons, but data privacy is one of the big reasons. So although we'd like to share as much information as we can, we also have to be aware that there are different data privacy regulations all over the globe.
Yeah. So at the moment, the answer, I guess, is no, but maybe in the future, who knows? But I do understand the fact about data privacy.
Paul, just on that point, Devon's right, but I think it is worth saying we obviously within the oversight offices do look at the information on a country by country basis, and I think the suggestion from the question is surely there must be some variation country by country in terms of NCs per audit, percentage major. And that's true, that there is variation, and it is something we look at within the oversight, the global oversight structure, but we wouldn't be looking to sort of publicize or publish that information.
Yeah.
But the NCs that are being written, though, the actual against the clause numbers, we look at that. But I don't think there's as much variation as people might think there is.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
true. Yeah. The frequency might change or the categorization might change, but I think the clauses, there is a sort of consistency globally on the clauses that we're seeing. I think that's a fair comment, Devin.
Yeah. Good. Now back to you then, and we're back to IATF standard again. Now, in several places in the standard, we see the terms such as, and the question here is about if an organization didn't measure mean time between failure, MTBF, or mean time to repair, MTTR, if they didn't measure those, would that be a nonconformity against IATF 16949?
These, and Paul, we know that these are examples of things that an organisation can can measure. So mean time between failures, mean time to repair are important indicators, but I think it's not possible to say they are mandated by the standard. So they are provided in the standard as examples. So my view would be that, and again, you have to kind of take this in the context of how the organisation is managing their equipment. In the case of the IATF standard, the TPM, total productive maintenance section. But yeah, I don't think it's like OEE is another one that we see. It's not mandated that organisations measure overall equipment effectiveness, but it's a really important way of understanding how your equipment is being used and is operating. So my view would be, particularly in the case of mean time between failures, mean time to repair, those two acronyms that are listed in the standard are not mandatory. And if an organisation wasn't measuring those, that wouldn't in itself be a non-conformity.
Yeah. And I guess the only thing that might change that is if the customer specific requirement specifically made that a requirement.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah. Good. Devon, measurement system analysis. Now, I think we see MSA now in the top 10 non-conformities that are being raised in IATF audits. And I think a lot of auditors think that MSA equals gauge R&R, and that gauge R&R has to be undertaken on each type of measurement system. Is that a requirement, or is there other ways that an organization can understand the variation? For example, for an inline camera measurement system.
Right. So gauge R&R is not mandatory. Obviously, it's a key term that's used very often,
Yeah.
but it's really set by the organization and their customers. So they need to use MSA methods such as bias and stability studies, but they don't have to use gauge R&R.
Good. Yeah. And I would 100% agree with that it would be very difficult to do a gauge R&R study on a measurement system, really, where there was no human intervention, where the measurement system was really the machine. So you're right, I think, Devon, that maybe what the organization would do is create a reference standard, and then they would check against the reference standard at defined frequencies to look for any drift in the measurement system. So I think, yeah, we're definitely aligned on that. Now, the next point is about when the auditor, particularly when the auditor is auditing production, should the operator interview the operator?
Should the auditor interview the operator? No, good question. And Paul, this might be in response to one of our videos where we almost we do our best to sort of recreate an audit, but we are obviously slightly limited in how we do that. But absolutely, where it's kind of safe to do so, we would always encourage the auditor to engage with the people that are operating, working on, and responsible for the process. And that, in a way, applies throughout, doesn't it? So even with top management, we wouldn't expect the auditor to interview the person that kind of is responsible for quality. We'd expect them to talk to the management team. In the same way, in production, we wouldn't expect them to just audit the production manager or the process owner. We would expect them to engage with the people undertaking the activity. And Paul, you know that within the IATF rules, there is a real sort of emphasis on undertaking the audit at the location that the process occurs. So making sure that auditors are moving through the organisation, engaging with the people at different points across the organisation but obviously where it's safe to do so.
Yeah. And just one little follow-up question on that, Niall, about language. So we all know that maybe in an organization, people are not all fluent in the same language. How should an auditor deal with that?
So that's a great follow on question, and this should be something that comes out of the audit preparation. So the auditor, again, particularly with certification body third party audits, the CB will understand what languages are spoken. Now there's a fine line here between the languages that individuals can speak versus the language of the organization. And we sometimes see, let's say a management language and then other languages deployed in different parts of the organization. But absolutely, the certification body has to understand the language of the audit, and bearing in mind the audit will cover the entire organization. It's important that the auditor can communicate with everyone.
Yeah.
This gets a bit messy, doesn't it? Where you've got, maybe a group of individuals that don't speak the same language as the rest of the organization, but that then raises other questions about how the quality management system of the organization is communicated to them, how they are integrated into that quality management system.
Yeah, I think that's a real challenge for many organizations, but not one that we can duck. And I guess you're saying in the context of third-party audits now, but equally, I think it's important that for internal audits and second-party audits, that auditors can effectively communicate with the auditee. And sometimes that's going to mean that they need a translator to support them.
Yeah, and actually, within the third-party scheme, within the IATF scheme, we would require the certification body to add time where a translator is used. The amount of time would increase by 20% for those portions of the audit where translation is required. So you're right, in a way, whatever type of audit it is, you probably need to factor in a bit more time if you are using a translator.
Yeah. And Devon, the final question I think we had today is about setting of quality objectives. Now, the question was worded, will the quality objectives be 100%? I think the person posting this question probably was relating that to delivery performance. So does an organization always have to set a delivery performance target of 100% on time?
No, Paul. It is up to the organization to set their performance goals. Now, as far as delivery performance, I know a lot of auditors think it should be 100 or see it as 100 because there are quite a few customer-specific requirements out there that require 100% delivery performance. But that's a customer-specific requirement. It really is up to the organization and their customers to set those quality targets. So 100% is not mandatory.
Yeah. And I think the other thing, Devon, in the wording in the standard, it talks about delivery schedule achievement. It doesn't necessarily talk about percentage on time. So you're right. I think that some customers will mandate this, and an organization has to respect that and integrate those targets within their target setting. But you're right. It doesn't specifically say in IATF the delivery performance target shall be 100%.
Paul,
have you anything to add?
I was just going to add on the target setting processes. I think it's really important that organisations keep on top of targets, and they review how they define their targets. And we see this from time to time where the organisation is achieving all their targets, but that might be in some part due to their target setting process. So making sure organisations are setting meaningful targets, let's say, and chasing them. So improving, that's the whole spirit and expectation of the IATF standard is around continuous improvement. So we would expect to see that in the allocation of targets for the organisation's processes too.
Yeah. Great. Well, thank you again, Devon and Niall, for your input for this podcast. We hope the listeners find these useful, and we do plan to keep these rolling over the coming months and years. So we're always willing to take any of your questions and incorporate them in future podcasts.
Yeah, keep them coming. We'll do our best to answer them. Thanks, Paul. Thanks, Devon.
Yeah, and thanks to everyone listening.
The IATF 16949 podcast, where we talk about all things automotive. Find us on our channel at youtube.com/IATF 16949 auditing, or visit our website at www.iatfglobaloversight.org. This is the IATF 16949 podcast.